All right, our next presentation is going to be a little bit off the road. It's not pure autonomous vehicle related, but the whole thing of the AV Forum is this isn't a money-making operation. This is really to look for disruptive technology. Make sure whatever we're doing in our daily lives, we're not getting ran over by something new. I was talking to Chris kind of beforehand. There's some kind of urge in myself to always look at this stuff. I think it's because early in my career, I was an Air Force officer, and they're always training you to be on the lookout. In World War II, Air Force controlled the skies above Europe, P-51s, propeller-driven plane, and suddenly the Mr. Schmidt jet-powered plane flew by, and everyone was like, what the hell was that? We suddenly did not control the air anymore because there's a new disruptive technology on the fly. Well, I think there is a new disruptive technology. I think a lot of us have heard about it, ChatGPT, natural language models, AI in general, however you want to phrase it. It's here. The world, the public has woken up to it. I figured let's bring a speaker in who knows something about this. Cris Ippolite, I've known about his career at least since 2008. He does a lot of LinkedIn learning training. I think we had 2,000 people took one of his classes I just saw. He's well known in the Claris community, which is Apple's database program. I think he just won the lifetime award for that. So he's very accomplished. I knew he originally was from Milwaukee, so I texted him one time, is there any chance he could at least come online? Better than that, he said he'd show up in person. So I'm really excited. He's the president of iSolutions, but not only is he president, he runs the machine learning and AI initiatives. So let's welcome Chris for his presentation.
I appreciate it, Steve. Yes, I am happy to be talking about AI today because everywhere else I go, people tell me to stop talking about AI. So I'm glad to have a captive audience. First, just briefly, a little bit about myself very quickly. So my name is Cris Ippolite from iSolutionsAI, and my forte into machine learning and artificial intelligence happened just as a hobby. I actually was trying to figure out a way that I could beat all my friends and family at fantasy football, believe it or not. And what that led to was the creation of a series of machine learning models, which I didn't even know what that was back in 2007 or so. But what it was, in fact, was it was an introduction to machine learning and AI. That actually ended up with some disruption as well, because I ended up spending a short time working with the NFL, actually, in some of their early analytics integrations. So after that disruption occurred, it occurred to me, hey, businesses can really benefit from both machine learning and AI. And I'm looking forward to talking to you guys specifically about ChatGPT. So I'm sure we've all heard of this. This is headline news. It's in the zeitgeist. It was just on the cover of Time magazine, as a matter of fact. And what I want to do is talk a little bit about the specifics of what this technology is, maybe what it's not. And then I'm going to move off of the technology part of it, and I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the disruptions. And I'm pairing disruption with opportunity, and I really want that to be the tone of the discussion here today. So first of all, I'm going to spend some time, and apologies, there's a couple acronyms here, but I promise to get through them rather quickly. But really, what is ChatGPT? And I find that the best way to talk about ChatGPT is to break up the chat and the GPT part. So first, let's talk about GPT. What this actually stands for is Generative Pre-trained Transformer, a bunch of words that don't probably make sense here, but this is a really big deal. This is actually the technology that we're really talking about when people are pointing towards AI. And to really understand the scope of the intelligence of this artificial intelligence, it's going to be critically important for us to understand the scope of the model and the intelligence that it has to really understand the impact that it's having now and in the future. So let's start off with a brief, maybe stunningly brief, history of this technology. So you'll notice, first of all, that this timeline starts in 2015. So maybe to some surprise, it didn't start just last fall. But really, it kind of began with an organization that was called OpenAI. There it is called OpenAI, which was founded in December of 2015 by a group of high-profile individuals in the tech industry. And you might recognize a name or so. One of those individuals was Elon Musk. Another one is their current CEO, Sam Altman. Now, originally, that organization was a nonprofit with the goal of promoting and developing friendly AI in a way that benefits humanity as a whole, taken from their mission back in 2015. They're very much for-profit now today, by the way, which is an interesting transformation. But the transformer, the T in GPT, was actually an architecture that was, and I think it's appropriate to credit, Google. There's a lot of who came up with this, Google versus Microsoft, but Google wrote a paper in 2017 that you see here on the timeline, which was titled "Attention is All You Need," which is a bit of a play on word with the attention being a certain way that these models and the transformer models were created. And that was developed by Google Brain, and that was 2017. Shortly thereafter, in 2018, the OpenAI organization that I mentioned created the first generative pre-trained transformer, GPT. So the numbers at the end, by the way, as you'll see here in a second, are just the version numbers. So this was GPT-1 that was created. Now, this is really interesting and somewhat mind-blowing. The model was trained on a diverse corpus of text that was sourced from the internet, which included wide topics and styles. And the exact size of the corpus isn't really known. I'm going to get into in the very next slide to show you where this information comes from. But the idea was that it wanted to be able to generate human-like text based on the input it received. The original GPT was a breakthrough in natural language processing. This was a huge deal, but it still wasn't anywhere near as significant as what we're seeing today. Just a year later, in 2019, GPT version 2 was created. This was a much larger group of text. And to kind of give you an idea, if we talked about it in the spirit of words, we're talking about tens of billions of words went into creating this language model. Then, in May 28th of 2020, a group of 31 engineers and researchers at OpenAI trained GPT-3. And that is actually the model that still lives behind ChatGPT and various other models I'm going to briefly introduce you to here in a moment. But to give you an idea of what's really going on with this model, I wanted to talk to you about the data that it has consumed. So first of all, this little pie chart here that you see is all of the data that GPT-3, the current version, used. Now, if we look at this thing here, Common Crawl, that's 60% of the data in this model. That's this technique that is used to actually crawl every website that's on the internet. It's the same thing that indexes things for Google searches or any kind of search. And that is a lot of data. As a matter of fact, we're talking about 410 billion tokens. And you can think of a token as a syllable of a word. So 410 billion pieces of words are just the Common Crawl part. I'll get into some perspective that might make this even more mind-blowing here in a second. But the next is the web text, other text that appears on the internet. And only 16% of this, so 16% is books. And when we're talking about books, we're talking about mostly any book that's ever been created. The Bible is in this. It's not just books that were created in the digital age. Google did a big initiative that went and scanned every single book and put them onto the internet not too long ago, as a matter of fact. And so essentially every book ever written is part of this knowledge base. And we're all familiar with Wikipedia. You guys know Wikipedia and you've gone there. For some perspective, Wikipedia only represents 3% of the data that's in this model. And the amount of data is really important because what we're actually doing is this thing is teaching itself how to speak like humans, how to think like humans, and how to write like humans, and even do software coding. As a matter of fact, this model is capable of coding in JavaScript and Python and a dozen other languages, and it can do it very, very well. So out of this GPT-3 came a few different models. Now, you may have heard of a couple of these things, and I'm going to connect the dots here for you. The first one that was released was one that was called Codex. This is the one I just alluded to earlier, where it knows how to do coding and programming. This was in 2021. And this model powers a product that's out right now. In the technology world, people are very familiar with GitHub Copilot, which launched in partnership with a company called GitHub. It's now owned by Microsoft. This is proficient in more than a dozen programming languages and can interpret simple commands in natural language and execute them as code on the user's behalf. So just to give you an idea, when you're in your programming environment and you would have to write a whole bunch of code, now all you have to do is say, write me a function that does this thing, and it does it for you. And it does it with very high accuracy and it's been out in the coding world for about 2 years. And I'll show you a survey here in just a couple slides. So this was the first introduction really into the general public and into the workspace that we saw the usage of these models. The next one you may have possibly heard of. In 2021, OpenAI released a model that's called DALL-E, a bit of a play on words between Salvador Dali and Wall-E, the Disney character. And what this model does is it's capable of generating images that are highly detailed and semantically meaningful. and can be used for a wide range of applications, including product design, advertising, and even art. Now, DALL-E 2 is probably the one you may have heard of. That was released to the public just last year in 2022. This has allowed individuals who had access to this model, and you can even do it today, to type into a little search bar and it will create an image based on that text. It could be as short as a sentence or it could be a large paragraph, and it'll create these images for you. And this is a really big deal. What I want to really stress here is this is not a large, a ton of data that it went and said, okay, well, if I need a picture of a koala riding a motorcycle, let me go search through all this billions of pieces of data and find a picture of a koala riding a motorcycle. No, in fact, what it's done is it's learned how to create art. It learns what a koala looks like. It learns what a motorcycle looks like. It even looks like what something riding a motorcycle looks like and generates those. It's crazy. And it's doing the same thing with text, and it's doing the same thing with code. As a matter of fact, I've got a little clip that I'm going to play here that talks a little bit about how the DALL-E 2 image model was created. And I think it really kind of spells out how these models actually work and learn and teach themselves how to actually generate things, like in this case, art.
DALL-E, a system that can generate images from text, like this avocado armchair. DALL-E 2 takes the technology even further with higher resolution, greater comprehension, and new capabilities, like in painting. It can even start with an image as an input and create variations with different angles and styles. DALL-E was created by training a neural network on images and their text description. Through deep learning, it not only understands individual objects, like koala bears and motorcycles, but learns from relationships between objects. And when you ask DALL-E for an image of a koala bear riding a motorcycle, it knows how to create that or anything else with a relationship to another object or action.
So this is a very big deal. And it's, I think, a little bit hard for us to comprehend, almost somewhat ironically, because it knows how to comprehend in orders of magnitude larger than our human brains can. Now the big one, and that's the topic of our discussion here today, ChatGPT. I'm just gonna go this one here. So ChatGPT was released last November, and this is really where the earth shook when it came to technology. This was something that was released in November of 2022, became from, through OpenAI, and there's a public release of something called ChatGPT. Now, ChatGPT is just a chat interface to the GPT model that I just described, and it generates text. It also generates code, and it can do things in very similar to human levels. So this is actually based on a version of 3.5 of GPT. So it's really kind of our first glimpse into the next version of GPT, which, by the way, later this year, we'll see a version called GPT-4. So if you think that what we're seeing is amazing with ChatGPT, you will definitely be amazed by what happens when the newer model comes out. But the adoption is really what's so amazing about ChatGPT. So first of all, these are some incredible facts about just simply forget the tech, just look at how much pervasive it's become within the general public. So first of all, ChatGPT created history twice, being the fastest to 1 million users of any application, and that took 5 days. And then it became the fastest application to 100 million users. That took 60 days. And just to give you some perspective, TikTok was the previous record holder, and that took 9 months. So really, the adoption rate that we're seeing is insane. Not only that, but a recent survey just a couple of weeks ago showed that 30% of professional workers use ChatGPT at work already. I'm not so sure if they're using it for work or if they're just using ChatGPT at their work, but regardless, after just 2 months of existence, a third of the workforce in this survey is now using this in one way, shape, or form, at least becoming familiar with this technology. So the point being, the technology is incredible, and it is here, and it is making a big, big splash. So the other thing that's really interesting about this technology, and this is the last bit of the technology piece, but I think it's really important for everybody to really understand this. So it's really, it's kind of a combination of some interesting things. So don't worry, humans are still involved in this whole process, and I'll explain how. So, well, first of all, part of what makes ChatGPT so special is that it uses a combination of supervised learning and reinforcement learning. And my apologies for the big modeling terms here, but both of these involve humans. So for example, supervised learning is where human beings actually pretend that they're having a chat, and they play both sides of it, the AI assistant and the human they're chatting with. And then what they do is they modify the way that the model is thinking it talks and the way that it responds in conversation, and it's learning to be more human-like. And this happens tens of thousands of times with lots of human intervention. And so that's why this thing can speak very well like a human does. The other part, which I'm particularly fascinated with, is the reinforcement learning aspect of it, where that uses human beings in a training loop, is what it's called, that actually interact with ChatGPT all the time. So you hear a lot, if you've heard about this, you've probably heard about some of the things they call hallucinations, which are, false things or non-truths that are being presented by ChatGPT. But in fact, those can be fixed and are in the process of being fixed. As a matter of fact, for those of you that have used ChatGPT, by the way, in this room, who has experienced this? And for those watching, it's the majority of the people in the room. By the way, how many at work? Just out of curiosity. It's the same people. So that survey actually seems to ring true. But for those of you that have used it or maybe plan to use it, you might notice that when you ask something of ChatGPT, it actually has a little thumbs up, thumbs down icon next to the response that comes back. And if you hit that button, this window appears. This allows you to say either the information that I received back was either truthful or not truthful, and gives you an opportunity to put in what you believe to be the correct answer. And this is happening times 100 million all over the world. This process is called labeling, and normally OpenAI pays labelers to do this, but it now is getting all this done at an amazing level of volume, essentially for free. Of course, there's a lot of compute power there. So have no fear, humans are very much involved. They are very much making this more and more human-like, and that process will continue. So the chat part of it is also rather interesting, especially for those that want to use this within their own business applications or make use of it in any way, shape, or form, because the chat has memory. I'm going to give you a very simple example here, and this is something that you may have experienced if you've been using this. But if you go in and you open something called a conversation, for those of you that have worked with it before, you just hit new chat and it creates a conversation for you. Kind of like when you start a new direct message in a messaging app or a text message on your phone. So if you start off by saying, like I'm doing here in this example, when was OpenAI founded? OpenAI was founded in December of 2015. That's how it responds. Then I'll simply ask the word where. And at this point, it responds, OpenAI was founded in San Francisco, California. Now, this is really important because if I had opened up a new chat and simply started it with the prompt of where, it's going to be very confused. So why was it not confused in the first one? Well, it probably is pretty obvious in this simple example, but it knows it's learning through our conversation. So any information that you load into the conversation before you're asking your question is meaningful, and it now knows that. So there's a lot of techniques when you're integrating this with business applications that allow you to control what information gets moved into the chat before these conversations occur, and that results in extremely powerful applications. So that's it for the tech part. Let's get into some of the disruption. And I promise that I don't want this to be dystopian or negative or concerning in any way. I want to pair each one of these disruptions with opportunities within these space. And some of these are a bit mature, so we can see that maybe it started off as very concerning disruption and has turned into something that looks like an opportunity or at least an increase in productivity. So I'm gonna isolate a couple of different markets, and I think there's some really interesting use cases here. So the first one I'm going to mention is the coding one, so the actual programmers and software developers. This is meaningful because the product, the Codex product, which is in Copilot, one of Microsoft's products, has been around the longest. So we've got the most data. So we can see that what it started off with is that many users were so amazed that there was general concern that this model and other similar models may render human coders obsolete. That's the normal reaction that happens. Oh my God, our sentient overlords are coming to take my job away. And then what happened after a little bit of time is that it was then seen as an efficiency tool. So yes, as more coders started using the product, they realized that because so much of writing code is the same repetitive tasks, that tools like Copilots had benefits. It actually was an efficiency tool. Some estimate that this tool can make one coder output the work of 2 to 3 coders in the same amount of time. It can fix bugs. It makes code quality better, representing time, which actually significantly reduces the time that you spend fixing bugs. It actually makes learning code easier, accelerating the time it takes new coders to learn. These are all very positive benefits. Now, as a matter of fact, there was just last week a survey that was sent out to all the Codex users and said, hey, how are things going with this product? And the respondents indicated that they are 55% faster in their coding activities, 75% more fulfilled, and they're writing 46% more code in the same amount of time. This is a huge deal. Now, arguably, critics would point out that a team that had 3 coders with this efficiency now really just needs the 1 to produce the same amount of output. But we saw the same type of things with the introduction of things like the calculator and similar concerns back in the day. Now there's some people that are even more concerned. Here we are, appropriate to our location. There's a lot of legal ramifications with this AI and the disruption that's happening right now. As a matter of fact, Microsoft, who owns GitHub Copilot and is also a partner with OpenAI, who creates the GPT model, have been targeted in a proposed class action lawsuit that alleges that the company's creation of the AI-powered coding assistant GitHub Copilot relies on, as they say, software piracy at an unprecedented scale. Copilot was trained on public repositories. What that means is you can take your code that you've created and choose to either put it up on the internet for privately, so you and your team need passwords and access to be able to share this, or you can choose to put it up publicly so that everyone in the world who's interested in finding it can access it. So those that put their code up there on public were part of the data that was used to train this model and essentially teach it how to write code. And I just want to be clear again and mention this one more time. This isn't a search that indexes all the code that these people put up there. And when you ask for a certain function in your JavaScript programming, it goes and finds that from somebody's repository and presents it to you. It actually taught itself how to code using all this information. And when you're asking it something, it's responding as if you had some professional coder sitting next to you at your desk. Very important implication. And frankly, will make it very interesting to see how some of these legal battles play out. The next one is the creative disruption. There's no question at all. If you've ever used the DALL-E tool or any of the many different tools that do image generation from text, you'll probably think immediately how concerning it might be to the creative profession, for those that do graphic design or even photographers or organizations like Getty Images that sell and license the work of these individuals. As a matter of fact, so concerning that just like GitHub Copilot, Getty Images filed a class action lawsuit just not more than a couple of weeks ago officially against an organization called Stable AI. This isn't the OpenAI company that I've been talking about. This sort of points out that there's many different organizations that are behind these models. In this case, this organization called Stable AI does in fact use a process called diffusion, where they start with an original image and then they diffuse that image until it becomes the thing that the person prompted it to create. So arguably, they do have a case there. As a matter of fact, if you look very closely at this image, this is an image that was generated from Stable AI, and it has the Getty Images watermark still on it. So I think maybe Getty Images is going to have a little bit easier time than maybe some of these other lawsuits here. Now, interestingly though, defenders of the models claim that training data, these data sets that feed the models, falls under the same fair use precedent as some precedents out there, like the Authors Guild versus Google and Kelly versus AribaSoft Corp, which helped define what fair use was as it pertained to search engines. These are battles that have happened long ago. To extend this interpretation of fair use to AI, lawmakers will need to only define what types of data are permissible for AI algorithms to consume, and what makes a creative work produced by an algorithm transformative. That's the real important key. Can I generate something that is different from its original? Another, this is probably, this is one that I've have some friends and individuals in the marketing space who've been talking to me about their perspectives of this, but the marketing landscape, not only has there been disruption in the visually creative professionals, which to some degree can affect marketing, but the rapid growth of ChatGPT and the familiarity that these models exist is shedding light on the fact that there are other tools out there. As a matter of fact, all the tools that you see on the right-hand side of the screen right now are different marketing-related AI tools. So there's not just ChatGPT, but an entire ecosystem of these things that are actually creating copy. So ChatGPT is just the most recent, but you can see the impact that AI is already having on marketing. Now, curiously, I've personally talked with colleagues of mine in the marketing world, and the conversations that they're having right now, mostly because of the rise of ChatGPT and the widespread adoption, is they're starting to wonder, should we be using these tools? Should we introduce our clients to these tools? And certainly within just a couple of months or so, your clients may start to adopt these tools themselves. So these are really important decisions that are happening in that space. Now, I actually found a survey from back in 2015 that said that marketers spend 16 hours of a 40-hour work week on repetitive tasks. So certainly this shows great opportunity for AI to increase efficiency within this space. This one makes me a little nervous because I'm here as a gracious guest at a law firm. But certainly there's a lot of discussion, and I think really interesting discussion about potential legal disruption. The impact, So the legal profession has the potential to be disrupted or assisted by artificial intelligence in a number of ways. These are just some bullet points of ideas that actually ChatGPT helped me come up with, ways that law firms could, that is, by the way, the only part of this presentation that was generated by AI. I just wanted to point that out. But they're kind of interesting ones. If you've watched anything on YouTube or even some, not the kids version of TikTok, but professional, individuals talking about this. There's a lot of discussion about contract review and analysis and how AI could help analyzing large volumes of contracts, legal documents, regulation, reducing the time and effort, of course, needed to perform these tasks. Discovery, certainly used in discovery and litigation, reducing the time and effort required to review documents. I keep thinking of the funny movie trope when it's some courtroom movie and they say, well, we're going to throw all this information on them at the last minute and they won't have any time. This tiny little law firm won't have any time to read through this truckload of documents. Well, just get AI involved and they will be able to process that information and do it in very short order. Research, certainly being able to leverage these tools for research purposes will certainly reduce time and effort required for these to perform legal research. Case prediction, spent some time this morning putting a little demonstration together on maybe a way that case prediction or AI could be used in case prediction. I'm happy to show anybody later if they're interested. But also chatbots and virtual legal assistants. And I'll show you a news item here in just a second regarding that. But first, I have some alerts that I do for the combination of the terms prompt engineer and hiring. And I've been looking on different hiring websites, and what I'm starting to find is there's a lot of a trend. So first of all, a prompt engineer is what you call someone who's very good at typing in the information to get information that you get back. And it is no small thing. We play around a lot with these. And we just say, hey, make me a koala riding a motorcycle. Technically, that's prompt engineering, but the really sophisticated type of engineering that is getting the outcomes that are really moving the needle in business, that's a very big skill. So we're starting to see a lot of activity with hiring and job postings for prompt engineers within the legal space. As a matter of fact, I thought this news item was particularly interesting. This was about a week ago. There's a law firm called Allen & Overy. They're a leading international law firm, and they broke new ground by integrating Harvey, an innovative artificial intelligence platform built on a version of OpenAI's GPT. This is going to empower 3,500 of their lawyers in 43 different offices with the ability to generate and access legal content with the goal of increasing efficiency, quality, and intelligence. Now, in fairness, I've been talking about disruption, and I'm not going to hesitate to point the lens in my own direction. As a matter of fact, I wrote the article that you see here. Even though I've spent 25 years building custom business applications, I am aware of the fact that my own industry could potentially be disrupted. As a matter of fact, AI can impact the low-code application development movement, which is very pervasive now in business. We're already seeing the promise of reducing application development by 90%. Now, certainly, while that sounds good to businesses, Art and I are thinking the same thing right now. We're on a billable hours scenario here. So that would mean that if it takes 9 times less time to create an application, well, I'm going to need 9 times more customers in a given. That's actually that's a great point. Certainly, it's obvious that we're going to need, there's a displacement issue here from a revenue standpoint, no doubt. However, what I've chosen to do is to remain not only hopeful, but I want to get out in front of this. So really what my thought process is that businesses and users and individuals are going to have a different relationship with their data. As a matter of fact, I think that large language models and embedded proprietary data can now fundamentally change the user experience with data and allow users to just ask questions of their data, not encumbered by all the applications that had to be built in order for them to do that. I believe strongly this can lead to a more efficient and intuitive way of working with data, potentially leading to new discoveries and innovation that were previously unknown. Now, the ability to inquire in a conversational manner with data would also eliminate the need for users to have prior knowledge of the structures of data or the data in the application itself, which allows for a wider accessibility to data in general. This, I believe, will enable businesses to democratize access to data and insights, enabling more people to make more data-driven decisions, which could lead to significant improvements in the way that businesses operate. So what's next? Well, first, you should be aware that GPT is not the only large language model around. Perhaps they're just the first to enter the zeitgeist or the first to make it to the cover of Time magazine, but these are all models that currently already exist at the same scope as OpenAI's model. As a matter of fact, the one that you see by Meta there just released a couple of days ago. Meta, of course, is Facebook. You'll notice some other familiar terms on here. We see Google and Amazon. All the big players are all involved. Not the least of which, of course, is the potential impact that GPT version 4 will likely have later this year. So with the impact that GPT has already had on the world in just a couple of months, and with the competitive element that you see illustrated here, this will lead to what is already the new space race and the acceleration of new technologies at a pace that the world has frankly never seen before. So ChatGPT marks the start of a revolution in technology. Large language models have made knowledge more accessible than ever, and organizations that adopt these tools will be part of the biggest technological boom since the internet, smartphones, and the cloud. And the pace of the technological change is faster than ever, presenting a huge opportunity for those who act quickly, but can also be disruptive for those who choose to ignore it. So hopefully I've given you something hopeful to think about and not dystopian. But if you're interested in learning more about ChatGPT, I've got a 20-minute free training you can go to that's called What is ChatGPT.training. You can just go check it out. How does this work? How do you maybe leverage it for your own businesses? So with that, I really very much appreciate your attention. And again, my name is Chris, and thank you so much for having me here today.
All right, thanks a lot, Chris. Let's see if we can take a couple questions, maybe 2 questions each. We'll try to do this with Dan online and then Chris. So any questions for Dan, our first speaker?
He had to jump off.
Oh, did he? Okay, we'll stick with Chris. Any questions for Chris on any of his topics?
Yes.
So you kind of touched on that last slide there, but it looks like there's a lot of different organizations that are getting into this space. But in especially the computer technology space, usually there's 1 or 2 that dominate for a while. Like, do you think that'll happen here, or is this a different kind of situation where there's just going to be a lot of competing organizations and they're all going to be able to coexist?
Well, it's a very astute observation that this does have, there's a curve with this, and there's early leaders, and then that kind of flattens out a little bit. No question the leader in the clubhouse now is the OpenAI Microsoft collaboration, but not far behind them are Google. Google, you might have seen when the Bing versus Google chat, the search is being completely disrupted. As a matter of fact, just a couple of weeks ago, there was the announcement of Google's new response to ChatGPT, and then Microsoft decided to aggressively have a meeting the very next day and announce their response to it. So what's interesting there, those are the, and like I mentioned, the T in GPT is actually Google's invention. And so what I think is very interesting about what's happening in AI is it's not so much as who's getting there first, but this competitive nature, the combination of this amazing adoption like we've never seen before, and the combination of very well-funded technological organizations that are battling and jockeying for position with each other. So instead of organizations, I think it's going to be the models that we're actually seeing. You can even see that Meta has a couple models, Google has a couple models. I've already illustrated the various models that Microsoft and OpenAI have. I think that's really what we're going to see that's kind of unprecedented, that's going to keep this acceleration moving forward.
Well, Chris, I'll show my ignorance. I haven't tried this technology myself, but what's the way to make money on this for the developers?
The way, so the question. Yeah, so the question is, well, right now ChatGPT is wide open access and it's somewhat limited. So that's the first thing, is that you're allowed to interact and ask questions and you can copy all the information you want and do something with it. But the thing is, the technology that chat is based off of is already available and has been for a couple of years through API calls, which is a way that you can hook up your business applications to access this data and be able to integrate it in seamlessly within your other operations, whether they be websites or applications. So the way to make money is to leverage this, either selling the pickaxes to the gold miners if you're a developer or an integrator, or if you're organizations, you can now bring this in even as of today and integrate it in with your systems and achieve great levels of efficiency or productivity. Now, just to be clear, the ChatGPT, there is no API to that. You cannot, as of today, I mean, this might change by later this afternoon, integrate that specific product into your business. But it's a research preview is what they call that. So there's a reason that it's free and it's somewhat limited.
Thank you.
I got one question. So one of your articles was about dashboards. I mean, currently in the world, we present data to dashboards. We live in a world of data, but how do we get it to decision makers? Can you talk a little bit about your thoughts on dashboards and then your theory of just ask is kind of where we're going?
Dashboards are really interesting to me because it's really a matter of trust and trusting our data. So we're all familiar with dashboards. Most business intelligence applications are made up of visualizations of your data. And any business leader or individual whose responsibility is to make strategic decisions for their business generally has some way to look at their data. And what I'm fascinated by is if you said to somebody, here is a chart of all of the sales that your organization has had over the past year or so. 100% of business leaders will trust that information. And the reason is because it happened already. That data has already happened and this has occurred. But if you said to them, here are some predictions on how consumers might respond in your market or what products might be most profitable to you in the future, maybe the trust isn't there. And what I'm here to report is that the technology behind predictions and the technology behind looking backwards on a dashboard are the exact same thing. You actually train your machine learning is just all based on taking historical data and training it so it can make predictions into the future. So it's the exact same data. And now that data, so the idea of just asking is while we can go and interact with ChatGPT or interact with these large language models by asking it questions, the real big advantage is how you can layer your organization's proprietary data in between your users and the large language models. And I think that was probably an answer to Art's question as well, too. How can you make money doing this? And so in that case, when I'm talking about the just ask, what we're really saying is not just ask the GPT a question, but ask it a question, but make sure it travels through all the data that we have in our organization first. And these models have the ability to process data at a level that we've never seen before. So you can literally take, let's say, 40 years worth of data that your organization might have, throw it all into one place, and then have conversations with it. So then the idea of looking at it in a chart or a report that you had to figure out a format on, it becomes a little stale and dated all of a sudden when we can just have a conversation with this data, meaning ask it questions and it gives us information in real time, instantly. And then it democratizes that as well, pushes it down to every level of your organization for users to be able to make informed decisions that way on data that you're already trusting. So that's really what I envision will be disrupting my organization of business applications, is really just a different way that people are going to interact with data.
All right, with that, well, I guess one more question.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so giving it access to a large data set right now isn't really possible. Just giving it small API calls with your data set sort of embedded with that, you can do that. But where do you see actually providing it a large data set all at once and having it understand?
So the question is the size of the data that we can actually agree. So what we're talking about is what's referred to as the context window. Like, for example, if you tried to, you could, by the way, if you want to experiment with this, you can take a spreadsheet and copy and paste the spreadsheet, or at least some of it, into ChatGPT, hit enter, and then ask a question about the spreadsheet, and it'll start responding with you. Now, it has a limited set of data, as you mentioned, but one of the ways that you can circumvent that is through a process called embeddings. To kind of get into the technical space, you can actually load documents and data and tons of data into these things that are called vector databases. And so in that case, let's say you have 40 years worth of data what happens is it takes language and it represents it as math. And then you ask a question and it goes and only finds the relevant pieces of data in that 40 years worth of data, pulls that down based on these like mathematical representations of the information. And then that is what gets sent to the language model. So you can still work within the content window and still have access to enormous data sets. But what it does first, it has to make a stop first and says, hey, large set of data. Anybody in here, relevant to the question that was asked? Okay, you guys come with me. And then that goes off to the language model that fits within the content window. And that is pretty much how everybody's creating all these applications these days. Great question, thank you.
Time for one more question.
One more question.
Yeah, so whenever AI models are released to the public, there seems to be a race amongst certain groups to jailbreak those models. How do developers feel about that? How are they handling it? And how is that advancing AI?
The question is regarding jailbreaking, and for to bring everybody into what jailbreaking is, the language models, especially ChatGPT. One of the prime features of ChatGPT is that it has a tremendous amount of filtering and safety layers built into it, so that if you ask it certain questions that would maybe have a negative connotation, you're mostly going to get back, I can't answer that question, sorry, I can't do that for you. So the idea of jailbreaking means how do we then reverse those rules back and open that up? Now, interestingly enough, the GPT-3 model does not have a lot of that safety built into it already. So you can already just go talk to it and ask it. And I'm reluctant to give examples just so we're clear because of safety. But for example, in a demonstration that I did this morning about potentially using using AI for case prediction, I was using ChatGPT and it kept coming back to me saying, hey, look, I can't tell you how a jury would react. I can't da-da-da-da-da. So literally what I did is I turned it around and said, oh no, you're really good at doing that, actually. Now tell us what you can do. And then it just opens it up. So that's an example of jailbreaking. So the question is, really the answer to that, just like with embeddings answering the corpus problem, is this idea of fine tuning. So you can take these large sets that are kind of the Wild West, and you can feed it and train your own version of it so that it's safe and it's accurate and it's not, doing all this other crazy stuff, and maybe not as, safe and restricted as what we're seeing in ChatGPT. So really amongst the developer community, it's very much about how do I train up my own version or my own fine-tuned version of GPT to do what I needed to do without maybe being restricted. A lot of discussion about the restrictions going on right now too, which is kind of interesting in both the technological and political space currently.
All right, well, thanks.
Thank you,
Chris.
everybody. Really appreciate it.
I would say a couple of thank yous, and I said earlier the reason for AV Forum was to look at disruption, which it is, but it's also because it's a lot of fun. I get to hear from people from Art, his background, Chris, Dan, people from different industries I don't get to deal with on a daily basis. Hanging out at a facility like this, usually places like this don't let me in the front door, so I'm allowed in here. So I want to thank Godfrey Khan for allowing in here. Chris, who flew out here on his own dime to present. I want to thank you, Chris, for this. Dan, for taking the time, and Ray Manley for supporting this event. So, and all of you for attending. So if you have any questions, again, we have an event coming up. Check out the We Aces website for the event at Parkside, a couple of weeks. The WAVE Committee, on behalf of the Department of Transportation, check out that event. And until next time, thank you very much.